New Testament atheist scholar Bartman was on a radio show when the host asked him, "What do you think the New Testament really said?" Dr. Ehrman said, "We know what the New Testament said." The radio host was puzzled and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The New Testament says what it says. It's the most reliable ancient text we have." And he was confused. He said, "Well, I thought there were hundreds of variants." And Dr. Ehrman, an atheist, New Testament scholar, said there's like over 300,000 Greek words in the New Testament, and there's only 1,400 that scholars are uncertain about. But they're meaningless words that don't change any Christian doctrines. For example, 1 John says, "I write this so that your joy may be complete." In some of the manuscripts we have, the word "y" isn't there, so we don't know if the "y" faded and it's supposed to say "our joy may be complete," or if the "y" was added, so it's supposed to say "your joy may be complete." He said it's mostly stuff like that. So the radio host was puzzled that this atheist was telling him the New Testament was reliable, but Bart Ehrman is a scholar, so he's not going to lie. So why does every scholar alive today believe the New Testament is the most reliable ancient documents we have? Well, they have certain criteria. I'll just go over a few really quick. The date, how close it happens to the event. So in the case of the resurrection, Paul writes about it within months of it happening, which is unheard of in ancient history. Haven't had any reliable documents that close to the actual event. There's eyewitnesses' accounts with names written down. Another criteria is the criterion of embarrassment. Ancient writers, if they write something that's embarrassing to themselves, you have to wonder, why would they write it if it's embarrassing themselves? It must be true. So for example, saying women found the empty tomb, that would be embarrassing that the women found it in the first century. So if the writer was making this up, he would write that John found the empty tomb or Peter found the empty tomb. Then there's manuscripts that survive. So even though these manuscripts were written months and years after Christ died and was resurrected, the surviving ones are within decades, like 10, 20 years of the events that happened, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. For example, the second closest is the life of Alexander the Great, which was written 400 years. His first biography was written 400 years after his death, and scholars think it's mostly reliable, his biography. And how many manuscripts? Because you can look, oh, this manuscript is this is this. There's so many manuscripts and they don't contradict themselves. The second most reliable document based on that criteria is Homer's Iliad, with I think like 6,300 manuscripts. The New Testament has over 20,000. So again, the New Testament documents, and if you're looking at it like Bart Ehrman, an atheist scholar, I think they call him a textual critic of the New Testament, he's looking at all this criteria to see, yes, this ancient document is historically accurate. You see, they look at it as historical documents. So you might say, well, it's the New Testament. Well, to them, they don't believe, Bart Ehrman doesn't believe it's inspired by God. He's an atheist. He's just seen it as an ancient document that the church, the Catholic Church at the Council of Rome in 382 AD put together and called it the New Testament. But for nearly 400 years, they were just ancient documents. So the reason Bart Ehrman is an atheist is not because he believes the New Testament is inaccurate, the Bible is inaccurate, everything we know about church history is inaccurate. He just can't get over the fact that there's miracles. And he'll tell you this, he doesn't believe in the resurrection. He says there has to be other explanations, and he always changes his explanation. He comes up with different explanations. But the fact is, based on the evidence, if you were bringing this to a court of law, based on the evidence, there's over 400 people that eyewitnessed Jesus' resurrection. Some of them were named. Their names are there. And there's no dispute. And even outside the New Testament, ancient historians, the Roman historian Pliny the Younger, who was alive during this time, says, yes, this is what the Christians believe. And nobody disputes Jesus died and was resurrected. They're just disputing. And no one disputes that Jesus lived and died. There's no scholar disputes that. They just dispute, did he resurrect? What's the explanation for 400 people saying they saw him and risking their life of getting killed for saying that? And in addition to that, like I said, there's Pliny the Younger in the 1st century, who was a Roman, wasn't a Christian. Then there's Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. He attested this. So the historical evidence of Jesus living, dying, and being resurrected is overwhelming. Plus, add to that the mountains. There's more biblical archaeology than proof of the New Testament than any ancient documents, any ancient event. And the more that we discover, the more the Bible is proven to be correct. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So the fact is, Jesus died, lived, died, and was resurrected. This is overwhelming evidence. But how does he want us to live? Well, when Jesus died, he gave us a church. Matthew 16:18 through 19. He said, you are Peter, the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So he gave us a church. And then, like I said, almost 400 years later, that church decided, the Catholic Church decided which books would be in the Bible and how to interpret it. Because they knew the guys that knew Jesus. And then a little over 1,000 years later, one man named Martin Luther came and said, nope, the Catholic Church is wrong. And he took the Bible, took out 7 Old Testament books, added a word here in the New Testament, took out 4 New Testament books, and started a new religion. He said he was going to reform the Catholic Church. He was going to get back to tradition, the original church. And then people disagreed with him and said, no, Martin Luther, you're wrong. We're the true church. Since then, there's been 40,000 different Protestant denominations claiming that they interpret the Bible more correctly. Since then, Protestant scholars, if you read the New Testament, you'll see it's the same as the Protestant and Catholic New Testaments are the same, because Protestant scholars put those 4 New Testament books that Luther took out, James, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation. They still leave our 7 Old Testament books out. They will refer to them as the Apocrypha, but the ancient church referred to them as the Deuterocanonical books. This is what the Catholic Church calls them. They're part of the Old Testament. And many Protestants, now with technology, and they're able to see this, are coming back. You see, because the Catholic Church can prove that every bishop alive today in 2025 was ordained by a bishop that can lead, and we can prove this historically, to one of the apostles. It's called apostolic succession. Pastor Bob at Cross Creek River Church down the street does not have that. So if you want true religion, become a Christian, become a Catholic Christian. God bless and stay Catholic.